I'm Dr. Suzanne Smith Rowley, and I'm so pleased to be able to welcome you to our next series, the webinar series that is hosted by CLASSy, the Collaborative for Leadership and Air Sensory Integration, and of course generously sponsored by Southpaw Enterprises. And we've been doing these for a while, and many of you know that we got started during the pandemic when we were concerned about the idea of social distancing. And we thought, well, what if we have social proximity, even if we have to do it virtually? And we've got nice feedback on our webinars, so we have persisted. This series will focus on back to school, school-based practice with air sensory integration towards an idea of accessibility. How do we make these important services that are now known to be evidence-based more accessible to students, children around the world? And so with that, we have a whole series lined up for you, and I think you'll find it very exciting. Okay, Marco.
Right, and I think I need to share something about our translated captions. And so if you are an international attendee and English is not your primary language, you can actually set it up so you can see caption in your preferred language. And so on the bottom menu on your Zoom, you can click the Show Captions item, and then you'll have a little arrow that will open a submenu where you can click Translation. And after you toggle this blue light, you will see My Caption Language option here. You can select the language you would like to see captions on.
Is this my turn?
Yeah, go
Not
ahead.
yet.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, and I did see that there was already a question, so thank you for using the Q&A box. The question was whether there will be a recording, and as you can see, they are recorded and will be made available through the CLASSy website. So don't worry if you come late or you miss a little bit, you'll be able to go back and listen again. Well, as many of you know, Dr. Suzanne Smith Rowley is just phenomenal at putting together amazing educational programs. She's been doing this for so many years for all of us, and we've so appreciated her expertise. And once again, she has put together a wonderful series for this year. As she told you a little bit about the history of these webinars, we're really excited to be sharing information about air sensory integration in the school setting. And I'm really pleased to introduce our speakers for tonight. Is this our only slide on the speakers, or is there another slide?
We have one for Kelly and one.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay, great. So I love this part. Thank you so much, Suzanne, for allowing me to introduce our colleagues and friends. Dr. Kelly Albright, I don't know, I'm feeling like, so I'm not the one who cries, but I am feeling a certain emotion that goes with doing this for a very long time. We've been around for a long time, so much that these colleagues really feel like our children in a way. We've known you for so long, and Kelly has worked with us for so many years as a therapist and as a colleague, a co-presenter. Kelly was was really instrumental in the development of the EASY. She led one of the really critical pilot studies for the tactile test as we were developing the EASY. And she's such an amazing therapist, and she's so creative and so smart. I was so lucky to work with her as she was completing her doctoral degree at Thomas Jefferson. And she's just an amazing person. So you're in for a treat to hear more from Kelly, Dr. Kelly Albright tonight. And our other speaker, our close friend and colleague, Marco. Marco, am I going to have to say your last name? Lau. I'm getting better, don't you?
Getting better. You get better.
Marco Lau who we have known for so long. He's came to the US and studied with us. Gosh, I don't even know how many years ago now. He's really like family. He's completing his doctoral degree with our close colleagues, Dr. Shelley Lane and Dr. Anita Bundy, and doing amazing work. And he works with us also at Classy. We're so lucky to have him. He plays so many roles, I can't even keep track. And he's been really instrumental in the data analysis for the EASY in our final analyses to finalize these tests. Every day, I just am so thankful for you, Marco, and for all that you do for us.
Thank you.
And he is completing his doctoral work related to school-based practice. So that's enough, but we love you both so much. And for the audience, you're so lucky to get to hear from these very bright, shining stars.
All right, and so I just want to remind everybody, don't leave before the webinar is over, because we have some prizes that are done at the end, and we will raffle those off, and you'll get to see if you've been a winner.
All right. Callie, should we start?
Yes, yeah, you can maybe start it with the next slide, Marco.
Sure.
And I thought we would just start out by sharing a little bit more about some of our personal experiences working in the school setting. And so, I think myself, I've had a very unique experience in that when I started practicing, we worked for a clinic and a school district. And at the time, we were able to offer, clinic-based services using an air sensory integration. And that was a really nice model. And I was very lucky that we got to do that within that district, because we had some special, clinics where the students could really get that more intensity. But at the same time, we also had embedded services, such as at a preschool, where we might do some more sensory motor groups and things in the classrooms. And so I got to have a really rounded experience there, really seeing what an ideal might look like when we're using air sensory integration in the schools. And from there, I went on to a large district in Southern California called Los Angeles Unified School District. And again, I felt very lucky in that they had about 20 clinics embedded within the district, basically converted classrooms. And so based on assessment, if we felt a child needed a more intense approach using an air sensory integrative model, we were able to recommend the children for that service and provide that service as part of their IEP or part of their services needed to access their education. And they would get that service during the school day. They even had buses that took the children to and from the clinic if it wasn't at their school. And so again, I was very lucky in that we had that model. And then as part of that, we also were able to, we ensured that therapists working in those clinics were trained, had advanced training. We did advanced training within the districts of therapists. So again, I had, two settings that kind of started out my early practice where I really got to exist in kind of, I know it's not the norm across the country or the world that we would get to practice in that way. But I feel very lucky that I got to see that, because I know what I want to strive to when we move forward. And so, I did leave that district and, moved an hour east, and it felt like I moved very far away because the services were very different when I moved to the schools there. And again, lucky, I had two schools that had converted classrooms that had, a suspended equipment and different things where it was a nice clinic, but the services that we were providing weren't, I had such a high, I guess, workload, so many students on my caseload that I wasn't able to give them as much as I wanted to, right? And so I know some of that frustration when that starts to come up, and, tried to work with the administration on ways we could, make it better for the students. When I talk a little bit later, I'll talk about some of my experiences in that school district that I had. And then, following that, I worked with Dr. Suzanne Smith-Rowley doing independent educational evaluations, where we really then tried to use our experience to advocate for students to receive these services, because we knew it was possible, right? We knew that certain districts would allow that, and we're all living under the same rules, laws, guidelines. And so it was a matter of making it equitable and letting all children have access to what we felt was quality care. And I'll say from my personal experience is that I was most successful in advocating for the students when the administrators were at the table. And those were the ones who would make the decisions about if this could happen. And so, you know, I always thought, well, if you can get to those administrations, the directors of special education to talk about it, most of them were willing to try. And so that's kind of where I start kind of looking at the broader picture as we move forward and set the stage for this series, is that where can we try? If you don't have these ideal models like I was so lucky to have, and how do we, take that footstep forward? And then I'll hand it over to Marco.
Thank you. Yeah, so my involvement in schools, I think it probably parallels to much of our audience, which is I was always a private clinic practitioner. So I was working clinical practice, but I would see kids that they were struggling at school, right? And so for some moments of the intervention plan, it made more sense to provide interventions at school. So I was lucky enough to have the flexibility to go to the school, talk with the parents, sit down with them and say, we're working on this and this and this with, assessment guidance here. But I think we would benefit a lot if we could transfer some of these services to the school. And so sometimes we do clinic and school. Sometimes we'd shift for some, a month or two to the school. And I had kids that I was seeing in the clinic, I was seeing in the school at the same time. And it was really a really change on a challenge on my communication, but also a change on the kid, because there's a lot of things on school that if we could really just, rearrange, they can create a big change. And we bring to the school a really important knowledge that I think people today are more and more aware of sensory needs, of how sensory integration impacts learning, attention, communication. But when I started, this was like 2011, that was not the case. Sensory integration was really new, and some people saw it as a fashion, something that come and goes really quick. And by being able to go to the schools, talk with administrators, talking with teachers really understood what was behind their students' difficulties and their student needs. And I saw a huge benefit. So I kept doing it, and now we're just opening a small practice, and people are eager to have us there, providing this information, providing training on site while things are happening, and not just go there, once a month or, at the end of the term and provide some strategies that we could think of. And so I also need to say that this was really shaped by the time I was at PTN. So I did my last internship at PTN, and Kelly was actually one of my advisors at the time, and I was able to also benefit from this ideal model that Kelly was talking about, where I could see what was possible. And I think for most of my colleagues here, when I talk with them in Portugal, even when we have access, it seems like sometimes we don't see what is possible. And so we try to bring a little bit of that. And I think this series will actually help us all to see what can be done, what is being done, and some ideas on how can we bring that to our own schools, our own districts, our own locations. So hopefully our experience will help you with that.
Thank you, Marcus. So we thought we would just start with a little background, and I think as these webinars unfold, you're going to get more and more information around certain topics. So this is just going to kind of touch the surface of certain ones, so you can tune into other ones later for more in-depth information. But in general, when we want to think about like, why is ASI in schools? Why is it important? And I think it really stems from this idea that sensory integration is the foundation for learning. And when a child is having a hard time understanding their body, taking in the senses, putting it together, it makes every task on top of that they have to do in school more challenging for them if they don't have a good idea of where their body is even in space and what it can do. And so we'll get those children referred to us who don't want to hold a pencil. Well, if you just start going and working with the child only on fine motor, sometimes it never translates because you missed, that maybe they don't feel their hands, and you have to work on something else in order to improve those fine motor skills. I had a child who he was always eloping from the classroom. He was a real challenge for all of the school staff, but very, very smart. And I had the opportunity to assess him, and he had a really hard time understanding the vestibular system and how that worked in his body. So when they were asking him to sit in the chair and when they were asking him to copy from the board and all of those things, he, rather than look like it was hard for him, he just left, right? And so that was his coping mechanism. And, one of the first things I was able to do in the process of the assessment was gave him one of the Verco rocking chairs that I had on campus. And they said, what is this magic? He's staying in class. And so, it was, being able to understand those underlying factors and assess them and determine how that's impacting their participation is really important. And it goes beyond that regulation. It goes beyond, just attention and engagement to really understand the body perception, the integration of senses for use, for writing, for cutting, for forming a letter, and all of those things. So it is a really important area for us to understand, because without those foundations, it's harder as they move forward in order to gain more skills, and then they see them fall behind or have other coping mechanisms that may not be aligned with a typical classroom, right? What the teacher wants them to do. And so if we go to the next slide, Marco. One of the things we want to think, from a survey that was done is that, 65% of school-based practitioners currently report that sensory-related issues are frequently or always a reason for OT referral. And that's a really high number there. And if you think about that, it's most of the sensory-related issues that we tend to get the referrals for are the child that won't stay in their seat. And I think if there was even a bigger understanding of understanding their body, that I think that number could even be higher as it moves forward. And then these are just some numbers in general in terms of the prevalence within the United States. When we're looking at 5 to 25% of children in studies have been reported to have some types of sensory integration difference, or and then we know that these numbers are higher in clinical populations. So there's a lot of research with sensory integrative problems in autism. We know ADHD also, but also, I think sometimes some of these other ones like Down syndrome or fetal alcohol syndrome may be overlooked. And so it's important. I wanted to put those on there so that that lots, if you kind of start doing some research on various diagnoses you might see in the school setting, you'll find that a lot of the common denominator are sensory integrative challenges. And, one thing that we should hold, close to us is that OTs are really, this is our specialty area. And so we should be the person on the school team that they're calling in or referring to when they suspect a sensory integrative challenge. And we know that there's other people that are interested in this area, right? I've had psychologists do sensory processing assessments. I've had behavioral therapists, and we have the training and understanding to really understand how that's impacting the occupation and what they're doing in the school. And I think we need to continue to take ownership of that. I know sometimes it feels, when you have such a high caseload at a school and someone else says that they'll do it, you're kind of like, okay, like, you know, because you feel so stretched, right? And so, but that, you know, that can lead to misunderstanding and misuse of some of the things that we have available to us. And so we want to make sure that we advocate. And, you know, even one of the things, you know, my dad is a retired director of special ed, and he would always say to me, it's not your problem. Like, if you can't see all the kids, right? That's the administrator's problem. They got to hire someone else, you know? So you recommend what you think is right for the child, right? And you do what you think is right, and they got to deal with it. That's not your problem. And so I always kind of kept that in my mind, as, you know, I thought about it and made sure that I stayed as part of those teams. I gave the children the support they needed. And then a recent study of some capstone work out of Thomas Jefferson University was a survey of teachers and administrators, and they all agreed that OT-ASI supports educational participation of students with autism. And so they do want and recognize that we have a role in that, and I think they want the help, right, if we can give it to them. And then this is an older guidelines and positions from the American Occupational Therapy Association that occupational therapy practitioners in schools can use sensory-based interventions or a sensory integrative approach when sensory-related issues affect a child's ability to access their education. And I think that's important that that is recognized. I have heard in certain school districts from therapists across the country that we don't do SI, right? And that is not, you know, in alignment with what our profession believes. That is part of our OT practice framework. And you can't just take a portion of it and say, we don't do that because we're in a school setting. It is part of understanding our client, right? Our child. And it's one of those factors that are in our framework that we're going to address as part of our comprehensive approach. And interventions can include environmental accommodations, but also direct treatment and collaboration as well with IEP team members. And so always, you know, staying true to that, you know, you don't see them coming on other disciplines saying, well, you just can't do that piece here, right? You know, this is part of a whole, what makes us an occupational therapist is that we use all of them. Okay. And some of the most prominent needs from these studies that came out of our students are sensory related, with a large majority of OTs feeling that sensory-based interventions are appropriate within a school setting. A lot of them looking at self-regulation, which is, you know, common when we're looking at some of the research. And a majority of OTs do use these sensory-based interventions, and or sometimes they call them sensory strategies, which are commonly used and implemented in the schools. And so I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about some of the different things that we're seeing emerge in the schools with this increased recognition of sensory and its importance. And kind of look, you know, right now, the way I view a lot of these things is more of, you know, a sensory-based intervention, right? It's something that they use more of a one-size-all approach to it. But when I think about the influence of AIR sensory integration and what we think about, it's bringing the idea of matching it to what the child needs, creating the just right challenge. And so you can see these sensory paths, which I just pulled off the internet, but look how complex they look, right? And so this is not really accessible for some of our children, you know, and so our role is to kind of come in and really think about, well, who needs to access this? Is this going to be outside of the special day class for the kindergarten kids? And what does the makeup of that class look like? Because maybe they can't figure out how to jump on all those letters and use one foot. There's a lot of things on there. And how can we maybe come in an approach to address all children? Marco's going to talk later about multi-tiered system of support, but we're looking at embedding that kind of AIR sensory integration thinking to this kind of strategy that's used in the schools to match it for the child, and working with the team and working with them to understand how to you know, maybe it's not important that the child does it the way it's intended, right? But what is the purpose of why we're using these types of things in the school? But it is something that you'll see. You can buy a pack, you can buy all these things off Amazon, right? Of these stickers and decals, and lots of people like to put them out in the hallway, and the child will go out and do that and then come back in after that. And so again, we're seeing, you know, whereas I feel like in my early practice, if we had said, we're going to put these stickers outside and stuff, people would be like, no, you're not. You know, so we are seeing people want to do these types of things. Okay. This has also really emerged a lot within, I would say, maybe the last 10 years, is we're seeing more classrooms in the US, at least, designed with this idea of flexible seating. And early on, when I was working with Zoe at PTN, we worked with Verco, and they gave us some rocking chairs to redesign some classrooms. And I remember I went into the teacher and I showed them the new furniture, and I said, how many do you want? They said 5 for their whole class. And I said, Zoe, this teacher wants 5 rocking chairs. And Zoe said, oh no, they're all getting. And I was like, oh my God, right? You know, what do you mean? But that's the way it was, you know, as you know, that was probably about 15 years ago, maybe 10 or 15, you know, and it was really new for them to accept this different type of stuff. But now we see that more teachers are, you know, teachers are doing this on their own, right? And so you'll walk into a class and they've done this on their own. And it's great that we have these opportunities, but as an occupational therapist trained with knowledge in sensory integration, we know that a child with postural issues might not do as well on a therapy ball, right? And because it's going to make it more challenging for them to sit. And so again, it's another opportunity for us to really shine in helping them understand what are the need, you know, what are these equipment give the child, and who is it best suited for, and how can you direct the children to different ways or understandings of their body and what works best for them when you're doing this type of model, right? Okay. And then sensory rooms has been a very hot topic, at least here in the United States. We're seeing more and more school administrators, schools just, you know, making a sensory room, right? And sometimes the OT is not even involved in what they're choosing that to go in these types of sensory rooms. So, you know, this one on the top right with all the stuff and the lights and the things hanging, like that probably wouldn't have been my choice in how I would have arranged that room to be useful for children. And one of the common things I'm hearing from a lot of occupational therapists is the frustration, right, that happens when people are just using it willy-nilly and going in. And it becomes especially complicated when you have these things like suspended equipment and swings and how they're using it. And so, you know, one of my experiences in one of my schools was that I had this beautiful, it was more like an OT clinic with a suspended equipment structure, but it was funded by the Parent Teacher Association, and which was great that they funded that. But because it was funded that way, the teachers of I had 3 special day classes there, would come in and use it at certain times of the day, but there was no guidance around how they were using it. And so I had this beautiful room, but when I was on campus to see children, I only got to use the room for an hour because they were in the room the other time without me. And I had other kids to service. And so, you know, and so it became challenging because it was dangerous that children were swinging very high. They weren't minding the environment. It was loud. I had a program specialist who said, well, this isn't safe. And I said, yeah, this isn't, you know, how it should be used, but I'm new here, and I need your support in how we're going to change it. And one thing that ended up coming out of it was they had to bring in the safety inspectors for schools, right, who approve all of the playground equipment for safety and liability. And he looked at the stuff in there and said, this is not You know, they can't just be running around here on their own, right? This is a liability for us. And I agree, right? When we work with a child in a therapeutic environment in certain ways, we are ensuring their safety. And so, you know, I think it's great that we're seeing more of an interest in having this type of environment in the schools, and there are some children that need it, but we really need to be at the table in the planning and the execution and how this is going to be used to ensure its safety and its efficacy, right? That it's not just a playground, that this is something, these are very expensive therapeutic tools, and they have the knowledge behind why we choose and use tools takes a lot of training. And so if you have others coming in and just using it without the support or the training, it could actually have opposite effects of what you really want to do. And so again, it's another area I think right now when I'm looking at we see again the viewpoints that people want and are interested in this. And if we don't get here at the table quickly, and we might see some things happen that we wouldn't necessarily agree with, right? And that we want to make sure that we have our roles moving forward. Sensory tools, again, when we're looking at things like wiggle seats, so I love this picture because it's like a closet full of, I remember I started at a school and I opened a closet and it was full of sit and move cushions, just 100 sit and move cushions. And I was like, well, I guess these aren't that effective, are they? You know, because I've got a closet full of them. But again, it was, you know, and this is kind of, to me, was a little bit pre-sensory room that we had everybody jumping again on, we're interested in sensory, we want to buy these tools. So they started buying all these things. And then I walked into a classroom once and the teacher first day said, I'm going to need 10 pairs of noise canceling headphones. And they gave me this list of the things she needed. And I said, well, hold on, you know, like why, right? And what had happened with the noise canceling headphones, which seem a little, you know, they don't seem that problematic, is that all of the students, because they had praxis issues, were so dyspraxic that became part of their routine, whether they needed it or not. And so they wanted to put, every day they would put them on and they wanted them on all the time, but it wasn't because of the noise, right? It was because of that was their routine. And so these things that seem harmless at first can really create a pattern that they don't need, right? And so again, it's another area that we want to make sure that we're consulting with others, because, you know, it doesn't, there's no rules on buying these things online, right? For teachers, that they have to show an understanding of when and how to use a tool. They can just use it. And so one of the things I hated but now loved about LA Unified is anytime we put a tool in a classroom, we had to accompany it with a consultation form. That was then signed by the teacher and a data collection sheet, you know, and I was just at the time, oh, this is so much work, but I understand it now, right? It really gave accountability as to why. And so, yeah. Mm-hmm. And then movement breaks. Again, most teachers are understanding the need for movement breaks. And I have no problem with movement breaks. I think they're great, but I think sometimes it's them understanding which type of movement might be appropriate and when, right? And what type, some of our kids who are dyspraxic, who have a hard time imitating these, actually disorganize them more because they can't figure out what to do, right? And so for them to understand, you know, well, maybe this is when you need something that has more, you know, softer, heavy work. And here's a time of day when they might need a little bit more of that invigorating movement, but having that role for them to understand how different types of movement and input can affect the children.
Thank you, Kelly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so I think, you know, the theme seems to me very clear, which is there's definitely needs at the school, sensory needs, and students that show sensory integration differences and challenges that impact their ability to learn. And there's a bigger and bigger recognition of the sensory tools and strategies that can be used and sometimes we get to this point where they are used without any planning, any assessment backing up what we are doing or other people are doing. And so there's a train that is going, it's really a great opportunity for OTs that are experts in this subjects to come in, consult with administrators, consult with teachers, consult with the whole school. And we need to jump on that train, right? And so this is an article that's very recent. It's from Colleen Whiting, and we'll be able to hear from Colleen directly in one of these webinars too. And Dr. Zoe Mayu and Dr. Suzanne Smith were part of this too. And it's a call to action exactly for us, school-based occupational therapists, to bring air sensory integration in a very organized, systematic way to really understand what are the needs of the students we're dealing with and how we can provide interventions that are tailored to them. And like air sensory integration always make us think about it. And so I would really like to shift to this idea of the opportunity we have at hands here. And this is one of these opportunities. We have more and more information, more and more literature that we can bring to the table when we sit down with administrators, when we sit down with teachers and stakeholders and parents and explain why do we need to bring air sensory integration to the school. Another important moment is this paradigm shift that we are seeing, not only in air sensory integration, but really at school-based practice, this shift from restorative function and adapt tasks in children only in special education to provide interventions that contribute to a more diverse, more equitable, and inclusive environment and approach, really to support all children at school. And I would actually say more than only children, would support teachers and we support aides and we support all the school community, because when we present at school with solutions, we're making teachers' life easier, and everybody benefits from our knowledge. And I think the biggest image of this paradigm shift, it's what is called multi-tiered systems of support framework. It's called MTSS in the United States. It's really a framework for multi-tiered interventions. MTSS is very common and familiar for those of you that work in the United States. And if we go international, we also see this multi-levels of intervention, which is really a preventive model, right? It's how can we act first to support as much children, in this case, as much clients, as much people that we can, so we can prevent disability. And so MTSS provides the ground to consider the whole child. And so we're talking about academics, and we're talking about social, emotional, and positive behavior too. So it's looking to the whole child and provide interventions that allow us to promote early identification of children who are struggling, provide differentiated interventions and environmental changes according to the children needs or the environment needs, support all children needs, and reduce referrals to special education. And you see here that we have different tiers or different levels. We have some of these preventive models with more than 3, 4, or 5 levels, and the most common is for us to see 3 levels. The most basic and the most grounded level is tier 1, or universal support for all students. And these are interventions that are really preventive, a primary prevention intervention to bring best evidence-based practices and universal design for learning accommodations that will benefit all students. It's really bringing literature, bringing what we know works to the school ground in this case. And the expectation is that when we bring interventions that are based on literature and based on evidence, we will support a lot of children. You know, some say 80 to 85% of the students will benefit, and they will only need this type of interventions or instruction. Then some students will not respond as well at this universal interventions, and they will require a little bit of more intensity of supports. They will require more targeted support to their specific needs. And so this tier 2 interventions are tailored interventions or targeted interventions for students identified at risk. So they're not quite learning as we expected. They're not quite behaving as we expected. And so we provide, generally in small groups, we provide interventions to try to accommodate for those needs. And then we also have some students that will not respond well at tier 1, tier 2, and will need more intensive supports, mainly individualized interventions, to really tailor their specific needs. So these are very specific. And I think we, as OTs, we are very familiar with this type 3 or tier 3 interventions. Is mostly what we see, according to literature, what we see and do in school-based practice is we have a kid in special education, they call OT, he has an IEP, and so we provide interventions, either push in or pull out interventions in school to address his needs. Right, so we have a continuum of supports. So what MTSS expects, and now with laws, especially in the United States, IDEA and the Every Student Succeed Act, we have laws that really put on us, on school-based practitioners, the responsibility to address all these tiers of intervention of this model. So when we look at these tiers, we're actually looking at different populations when we are working at schools. We are looking at individual students, maybe students with autism that we have on our caseload and have IEPs, and we provide interventions. We're also looking at groups of children that have handwriting problems, group of children that have praxis issues, groups of children that have a common diagnostic and common needs. Or tier 1, which is a population. Maybe it's a classroom, maybe it's a district, maybe it's, you know, the full education system. And so we can leverage our intervention to not be only focused on tier 3 interventions, but really expand to support students before they are referred to special education, and support the classrooms and teachers before they even find significant problems. And so we brought some slides that bring some studies and some references of things that have been done, and they fit in these 3 populations, the individual student, the group, and the whole school population. We see here things that we are used to do, like data-driven decision-making, thinking really about assessment and intervention specifically to a child with specific concerns. Really offer service 101, sometimes in the gym, if you have a gym or a sensory room at school, sometimes in the classroom to support the sensory needs of the children. We're talking again about individual and comprehensive assessments like the EASY or other tool that you can understand this child and then provide an intervention plan according to his needs. Then we have tier 2 interventions, for example, identifying a group of students who need additional movement and created opportunities for that group. Identify groups that need dynamic seating, that need strategies during the day to maintain their level of regulation and level of alertness. And so all of these interventions, of course, should be based on what we do best, which is assess the child, assess the environment, and see what would work, in this case, for this group of children, right? And tier 2 interventions are supposed to happen before tier 3, But when we provide tier 2 interventions, we want to make sure that we are keeping consistent and present the tier 1 interventions. So they are cumulative. And we brought an example, like a little case, very little case to kind of illustrate this. Tier 1 interventions, providing training for staff on sensory integration and the impact that sensory integration has on learning, on attention, on eating in the cafeteria, for example. Implement self-regulation programs like zones of regulation, and we can start to bring and communicate with the school, with the teachers, and hopefully explain them why it's not only about putting stickers on the wall, right? It's not only about following something that you find on Instagram, on YouTube. And this is actually very important because there's a super interesting report from 2019 that's called Forward Together. And they surveyed, I think, 1,300 teachers. And the most common resource teachers go to think about how to differentiate instruction for students with learning and attention issues is Instagram or Pinterest, right? And so we are there. If we are in the classroom and we are able to bring this information that it's already tailored, it's already curated for helping teachers to understand these needs that are most of the times invisible, right? Behavior is easy to see. What's behind that behavior is not so easy. And so really bringing this information to tier 1, to the whole staff, to the classroom, it makes a significant change, especially when we see a couple of years in the future. There's already some assessments that are coming up, like the classroom sensory environment assessment, that it's not targeting the student, it's targeting the environment, and it's targeting the classroom and how the classroom and the environment really affects student participation, especially when a specific student has sensory integration difficulties. And so there's a lot of ideas on how we can provide these interventions. And of course, you probably are seeing this and say, I have such a big caseload that this is great. I just don't have the time to do it. Or I kind of do this, but it's very informal. And we need to start thinking about ways to systematize this and to how do we keep consistency on this intervention so we can document them. So here's a little example, and I'll try to be fast because I don't want to take all the time for questions. But let's take John. John is a first grader. He was referred to OT because he can't sit still, has poor handwriting, difficulty using scissors. I think very common kid that we see. He also has a diagnosis of specific learning disorder. And after assessment of an OT with advanced training in sensory integration, we found out that he has a vestibular bilateral integration and sequencing pattern of dysfunction of sensory integration. And so because John gets an IEP, he gets 30-minute weekly interventions, 101, in the school sensory room, using vestibular and probe and tactile activities and bringing the use of both sides of the body. The goal, and also the hypothesis, is to help integrate vestibular information to promote posture and bilateral coordination. And so that results in more time on tasks and writing and cutting skills. And this is also followed by sensory strategies tailored to his specific needs, right? So we don't just bring a cushioned seat or wherever just because. We bring some of these tools that are really addressing what we found on John's case. Now, this is probably what traditionally we already do. We see a kid, 30 minutes, then bring it to the classroom, or we do it inside the classroom. But with MTSS, we actually have an opportunity to leverage and expand that intervention. And so if we start thinking, well, if John has these vestibular needs, it probably needs more movement throughout the day. And what can we do to bring this information and to bring this intervention, not only for the 30 minutes I'm with John, but really during all the other days of the week. And so we start doing some consultation with the teacher and bring some needs assessment of the classroom. How can we make it more dynamic? How can we include moments for John to have movement during the day? And so we can even start a service training for teachers and staff, and sometimes can be very informal during, snack time or lunch time. And if we are, spending 30 minutes to give information to one teacher, you can actually multiply it if you invite more teachers and more aides. The time is the same, but the reach is much bigger. And so we start providing universal sensory environmental accommodations like the Verco shares, like Kelly talked a little bit ago, to increase the opportunities to movement for all children, right? And so we are now targeting all children in the classroom, and all children would benefit. And most of them that might be, some struggles with attention will benefit from this more dynamic classroom and from a teacher that now understands that this behavior might be because these kids need more vestibular input. We also are helping John, because John now gets 30 minutes weekly and gets a teacher that understands his needs and gets a classroom that is tailored to more movement. Now, some kids will not respond to this, and we'll be able to identify some other kids that will say, yeah, we might need to follow up with some more targeted interventions. And so we move up to tier 2. And we might create something like a jumpers club, right? Because we assess these kids, we did a little assessment on what could benefit them. And we conclude that as a at-risk strategy and to prevent more problems in the future, we could start a group of students that benefit from target movement every day before classes. And we don't have to be there if we design this program, right? We can actually have the teacher doing it or have the aide doing it. And now we're targeting all these 3 kids that didn't respond to tier 1, are getting a little more target movement during the day, and we're actually helping John as well. And so John is now having more and more services and more intervention because we leverage our knowledge and we expand that intervention. So even if you have a caseload that is big, you can start thinking about how to advocate practically to target the other tiers as well. This is a great example on something in these terms. Colin did a great job with this article on an intervention. This is 3 students with sensory integration differences, and these differences were affecting their performance. And so the intervention was 2 times weekly for 30 minutes, and then a consultation with the teacher for 10 minutes. And they saw this great gains on active participation and function regulation with this type of intervention. And they sustain during the time. And so this is a great example of how we can start thinking about implementing this in our schools and leverage all this knowledge and all this intervention. So just to finalize before we open to questions, there's in literature this call to action for us to think about multifaceted approach to supporting sensory integration. There's a potential to provide sensory integration treatment with fidelity in schools. We have articles showing that and more literature coming. And bringing air sensory integration to school embedded in a MTSS approach allow us to reach more students and more contexts, more occupations. And so we hope that this is actually a little call to action for us to be excited to what's coming and to bring air sensory integration to all the students that deserve and need. And that was it. And we did it in time. Yeah, we still have 4 minutes.
Wow, that was so good, Kelly and Marco. And I think Suzanne and Kelly and I have all been typing away. What a great audience this has been with so many good comments and questions. I don't think I've ever been this busy during our
Yeah.
webinar.
Lots of interaction. One question, Marco, was directed at you, like how would you get funded to be both in the clinic and in the school for the same child?
Well, for that particular cases, parents funded this, right? So this was private practice, and parents would do it in sometimes insurances in Portugal. And this was in Portugal. I need to be clear about that. Insurance cover that. They don't really in Portugal. They don't care if it's in the clinic or the school. They just care about the type of service. And so parents would fund that in the clinic or the school.
Thank you.
And I think, Suzanne, you have one you want to answer, but I just want to respond quickly to one of the questions that asked about how it might be possible to measure outcomes for Tier 1. And Marco and Kelly, you may have more to add to this, but I just wanted to recognize what a great question that is. We're so happy when our colleagues are thinking about measuring our outcomes and sharing the results. And so I just want to put a plug in that Classy does have a research division. We're very fortunate that Dr. Roseanne Schaaf is our director of research. And anyone who's interested in measurement questions can put in a letter of intent, and Dr. Schaaf will review it and meet with you if you'd like to craft a potential research project. But I think it's Janie who asked that. Thank you for asking, and we're so glad you're thinking that way. We'll be happy to support you in looking for ways to measure those outcomes. I don't know, Marco, if you have other experience, or Kelly have experience with that. I want to add to that.
I think I think we're still kind of figuring out really OT's role and how to measure the effectiveness within the tiers. You know, and I think Tier 1 effectiveness depends on what you're targeting, right? If you're targeting less referrals, you could track your amount of referrals. If you're targeting more referrals, you could target the amount of referrals. It's just an easy way in to see, you know, how that training impacted the teacher's use of those kinds of things. And, you know, sometimes as simple as a post survey, right, of teachers and their knowledge and things like that as you move on is a start.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think we don't have clear models to do that yet. And so I love that you opened that, Zoe, this opportunity for Classy to support someone that is thinking about that. I'm thinking about that in my research and my PhD. And we're interviewing a lot of SBOTs, and they're saying, you know, I do this, but it's like I don't even call it a process. It's informal. And so it's great that we have that flexibility, but we need systematic documentation so we can learn from that and then, you know, study that. And so I'm sure there's people that do it. We have a group that we are thinking about this very careful and very deeply. Kelly and I are part of this bigger group that we're designing this course that can help exactly with these questions about how to do interventions, how to measure outcomes, and how to advocate for your role in schools with air sensor integration. And so hopefully we will learn a lot in the next couple years.
That's great.
Well,
And
Marco,
then
I think that's
Suzanne, do you have time to answer that OTA question? I think you said you were going to answer it live.
I did it
You
in the
did.
chat.
You typed
yeah,
the
I think
answer? Okay, all right, I didn't see it.
I did.
There's
I
a
think
lot of questions.
there's so much discussion. Clearly, we've hit a need, and unfortunately, we're out of time for today. We have a few housekeeping things at the end, so why don't we do that? And then we're going to be back next month with more experts in and look at that. And here are the dates and the topics. And we promise to bring you more research and more in-depth discussion and opportunity to answer questions. Okay.
Yeah.
And again, I think if you really want in-depth understanding of air sensor integration, we have our certificate program with modules 1 through 6, and there's a lot more information on our website.
And to whoever said they're coming to Richmond, I can't wait to meet you. I'll see you there.
We do have some financial. Oh, go ahead,
Go ahead.
Marco. Yeah.
No, I just
No,
wanted to talk about two brief slides. We have, as class is a nonprofit organization, so we hope that cost is never a barrier for therapists to get this training and to get access to appropriate tools. And so for those of you that don't know this exists, we have a financial assistance program for people that show this financial need. And so we just need to visit cl-asi.org. Do you say this dash? Well, how do you call this?
Forward
Dash.
slash.
Thank you, / financial assistance. And you'll be able to find everything you need to know to apply if that's the case. We are also serving school-based practitioners to learn more about how can we help you. How can we design resources and tools and in this case, a course to help you bring all this information or the AirSense integration to the school. So if you are interested in contributing to what we have to learn and how can we help you better, just go to this. I won't dare to say it. Just go to this link or just scan this QR code. And we'll be able actually to send a link to the email with the recording so you can take your time and respond whenever you have a chance. We would love to hear you and your experiences. And Suzanne?
Well, and we are a partner in the International Council for Education and Air Sensory Integration, and they will be having their Congress in Porto, Portugal, which it's so beautiful and we love it. And the last time we had a conference there, it was outrageously fun. And so it's going to happen the 29th to the 31st of January. So I just, save the date. As many of us that can go are going to go, and it's likely to be a very good time. And they already have an amazing lineup of speakers where you can hear the projects that aren't yet in print, so really hot off the press kind of work that's being done right now.
Congratulations, and thanks again for
Congratulations.
joining us, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. We hope to see
Hope
you
to
next
see you
month
next
at the next
month.
webinar.
Thank you.